I see it, my job right now is to get out of the way as quickly as possible, which is pretty much what I'm planning on doing. Introducing Dr. Vijayendra Rao to this audience is a little bit like explaining who VVS Lakshman is to cricket fans. So I'm not going to bother doing that. Dr. Rao, the stage is all yours, please.
I'm not sure that's quite right, but all right. Okay. This talk follows the previous two panels. So Shamika's panel and then the panel Urban Development. And my take is a little bit different. And let me explain what that is. Yeah. So, okay. I want to talk about what I'm calling reflexive policymaking. Yeah. If you think of the three dominant paradigms of policymaking, and you heard about a lot of that here in the last couple of sessions. One is what you might call the liberal paradigm, which is really, some people call the neoliberal paradigm, which is about getting government out of the way. Yeah? Growth is everything. So to make growth everything, you reduce taxes, you promote free markets, you have laissez-faire economies, free trade. It was the dominant paradigm, I would guess, over the 80s with the Washington Consensus that was pushing it all over the world. And of course, goes back to Adam Smith and even before that. Yeah? And that paradigm takes within it the assumption of human rights and democracy as being the underlying political underpinning for the idea of freedom and laissez-faire, so that people leave people alone. That's sort of the nature of the paradigm. And there are elements of this paradigm in a lot of Indian policymaking, the liberalization policies and so on that came in. I'm not trying to argue here that I prefer one paradigm to the other. I want to make it clear. I want to try to do what a sociologist would do, called an ideal type, give you things, categories to think about. The second we'll call the Keynesian or the neo-Keynesian paradigm, which is broadly what most people do in policymaking. Yeah? Now, let me start with the liberal paradigm again. There, the assumption behind that is that social scientists know very little about how to make the world a better place. Okay? Our knowledge of what to do with data or the theories we come up with is very little. You read Hayek on this, you know, people of that kind, even, Milton Friedman, yeah? Because we know so little, we cannot do much manipulation, so best thing is to stay out of the way, yeah? The second one, the Keynesian paradigm, says that, we are social scientists, we kind of know what we're doing, and we can use ideas of taxing and spending and monetary policy and all these other kinds of things to manipulate the economy to make it better, yeah? Whether we want to promote growth, we want to have greater equity, we want to have a metro, how do we fund it? Do we borrow or do we tax to raise revenue? How do we spend the money? Yeah? There, the assumption is that social scientists do some good, the idea of evidence-based policymaking that Shamika spoke so eloquently about. Yeah? That falls within the Keynesian paradigm broadly, in the sense that it's about government intervention informed by social science research, broadly. All right? Again here, it doesn't assume that social scientists are so smart. Yeah, there's a lot of political stuff that goes on, other things that happens. So it's a paradigm that takes a little bit of a humble approach to social science, the effectiveness of social science, but it's more than what a liberal policymaking would take. The third paradigm that is very dominant today and getting increasingly dominant is what I'm going to call the neo-paternalist paradigm. This assumes that social scientists are very smart people. The third paradigm. Yeah? We are so good at understanding psychology or so good at running experiments that all policy should be informed by experimentation. A. B. Sometimes the policymaker knows better for you than you do. So we will nudge you in particular ways to make you better off. Now, that may be true. There's a very famous example of nudging from the Schiphol airport in Amsterdam. In the men's urinal, there was always miss-aim, yeah? So they put a little bumblebee inside it and the aim got better, yeah? Sorry, women, I don't, if you've not seen a men's urinal, I can't explain it to you, but it's a very simple little nudge. That's fine, but now nudges are coming to very serious things. I will nudge you to make sure you go to the toilet, actually go to the toilet. I will nudge you to make sure you take the metro. I will nudge you to make sure that you save more, yeah? All kinds of things that may be very individual decisions. Yeah? So that results in an abrogation of human agency but also assumes that social scientists, economists, psychologists, everybody else are much smarter than you. We know better what is good for you than you do yourself, okay? So these are the three dominant paradigms of policy making. Whenever you think about policy, there's a debate amongst these things. Whether it's evidence, they're all sort of evidence-based in some ways, but the whole thing is within that realm. There is a fourth paradigm that's actually very important in India, and I'm going to give it a name. I'm going to call it the reflexive paradigm. And in our case, in the Indian case particularly, this is at least goes back to 600 before the birth of Christ, if not longer. There's evidence on this. Yeah? And I'm going to call that the reflexive paradigm because it simply says, let us give local control over local issues. The principle of subsidiarity, that's a very famous principle in public economics, says that decisions should be made at the level at which they're optimally made. A bureaucrat in Delhi should not be telling Punekars whether you should walk here or drive here, right? This should be a Pune decision. In fact, it should be maybe even a ward decision. That's the efficient level at which should be made, right? Moreover, it says that people who are affected by those decisions are the ones who should be centrally involved in forming policies that affect their lives. The emphasis is as what is called deliberative rather than electoral democracy, and I'll come and explain what that is in a second. In other words, what do I mean? Let me explain what deliberative and electoral democracy are. What is electoral democracy? Think about what it actually does. By the way, it's an 18th century technology, electoral democracy, largely the way it's the result of the French Revolution and so on, American Revolution. What does it basically tell us? It tells us that we have a collective action problem. You and I and everybody else will have different interests. So how am I going to make decisions that affect us? I'm going to vote for the candidate who represents my interests the closest. And what I'm going to add up the votes, and the person who gets the most votes becomes my representative. It is a process of preference aggregation. It's basically an additive principle. Yeah? That is preference aggregation, that is electoral democracy. There's another form of democracy, and that's the thing that goes back in India there's evidence from Ashoka's period, there's evidence from further back. There's a lovely article by Thomas Troutman in the India Forum about this last year. I wrote an article about it a few years before that. What is that? Citizens come together, have charcha, have deliberation, have dialogue to come to an agreement about consensus about what works best for them. People attribute it to the Greeks, but I think it goes back further than that. Yeah? The simple idea of a conversation to come to a collective decision. Now, what is the difference between that and electoral democracy? This is a point, instead of adding preferences, we are transforming preferences. Because we are persuading you of our points of view, and the most persuasive argument is the one that is going to result in the collective decision being made. It's a different form of democracy. Yeah? And I've called this oral democracy in the Indian case. I'll explain what that is in a second, rather than deliberative democracy, something that Habermas and others talk about in the European context. It is a very, very old principle about collective action via local citizen control. This has got a long tradition in India. It goes back to Gandhiji's Village Swaraj, but goes back even further than that. And there are two important examples of this in India. One is the 73rd Amendment to the Indian Constitution, which was passed in 1992. I'll explain what that is in a second if you don't know. The second is the Women's Self-Help Group Movement, the NRLM and so on. Yeah, these are two very important examples. There are many more. There are long histories to this. Okay? Why give it a name? Because if you don't give it a name, it's treated as a stepchild. Oh, it's cute, they're doing citizen stuff. I'm arguing it should be a central paradigm of how we do policy making. It should be in everything. It should be equal to these other paradigms. Why is it a stepchild? So let me explain and give you evidence, if we're talking about evidence-based policy making, about why that matters. I will focus on 4 themes here. The first is the idea of deliberation, the idea of oral democracy. I will give you an example of how data can be democratized, so that citizens will use data to make their own analysis rather than some fancy economists coming and telling them what is good or bad. I will show you that using these principles, we can even make politicians work better through evidence. That they will do the jobs that were elected to do better by simply incentivizing them. And finally, I will show you, and this is relevant for urban India today, as Shamika pointed out, India is rapidly urbanizing. But yet, we are stuck in a model of urban governance that is highly top-down. You have wonderful municipal commissioners, but they are not elected representatives. They run your cities. Your ward representative, your councillors create trouble. You don't even have an elected mayor. Yeah? That's not democracy at the city level. Yeah? And I'm going to show you that in the panchayat system where there is electoral democracy, I will show you an experiment we ran that shows you that it works better. Okay? So to persuade you that the lessons, so what I'm trying to do here basically is that we have tremendous lessons about how well this whole system works in rural India and many parts of rural India that we need to bring to the urban space. And we have not done that. Okay, sorry. So let's start with deliberative democracy. I've already talked about the aggregation of preferences and consensual or transformation of preferences. Indian Gram Sabhas. If you look at the 73rd Amendment to the Indian Constitution, it was passed in 1992, there are several elements. Firstly, it says that there'll be elections every 5 or 6 years, depending on the state, for ward representatives. Each Gram Panchayat in India has about between 7 to 10,000 people. For most states, Kerala is much bigger, about 1 lakh. So ward is a very small thing. It represents about 500-600 people. Okay? There'll be a ward councillor for you. That about 500-600 people. There'll be contested elections that you vote for. There will be an adhyaksha, a president, a pradhan, and a vice president of that village, who's also elected, whether through a presidential system or a parliamentary system, depending on the state. So you have electoral democracy. In addition to that, at least 2 times a year, every citizen of that village, every citizen of the Gram Panchayat will come together in a Gram Sabha to do several things: village planning, to question their elected representatives, to make decisions that affect their lives. Those Gram Sabhas, which are often forgotten about in the Panchayat system, are deliberative systems of discussion and dialogue for citizens, among citizens, for themselves, but also in dialogue with their political representatives and the bureaucrats who are meant to help them. It is required by the Indian Constitution. It's a remarkable thing. This form of deliberative democracy makes this the largest deliberative system in human history. There's been nothing like this as big in human history. They keep talking about the Greeks. India has the biggest system of deliberative democracy currently functioning in the world, which affects 800 million people. In the 2011 census. I don't know what the 2021 census would tell us. Yeah? Okay. So I did a book on this some years ago that I call Oral Democracy. Let me just give you a summary of that. I don't know if you can see that very clearly, but the way the 70th Amendment works is that every state then has a Panchayati Raj Act, including Maharashtra, which details how that's the principles enshrined in the 70th Amendment is going to work in that particular state. So I decided to study this in 2002 and 2004 in what were then 4 South Indian states. Andhra Pradesh was not divided yet. Yeah? Each of those states at that time did their panchayat acts in very different ways, giving more and less power. The best by far was Kerala, which devolved 50% of the state budget to panchayats. Yeah? Had a system of people's planning where they had very, very strong Gram Sabhas. You had little ward, little neighborhood groups deciding what was their priority. They went to the ward, they discussed those groups, the ward prioritized, they went to the panchayat level, they prioritized. And they had a lovely system of, they still do, of bottom-up planning that resulted in policies at the panchayat level that, there's a lot of evidence for this, were much closely in line what citizens wanted and were more effective. Kerala has a lot of other problems, but this was not one of them. Okay? Now, Karnataka and Tamil Nadu were called medium quality. Karnataka, of course, was the pioneer in the panchayat system because the Mandal panchayat system with Ramakrishna Hegde. And that's what then became the 73rd Amendment. So remember, amendments don't pass because of one political party. There's something that should be very clear. 2/3 majority in parliament, 2/3 majority in every state legislature. It requires a consensus across all political parties. This happened to be passed in 1992 when Narasimha Rao was prime minister, but he ran a minority government. Everybody wanted this. Every party wanted this. Yeah? So there was a consensus. Now, Karnataka and Tamil Nadu, in their Panchayati Raj Acts, Karnataka has a relatively sort of strong panchayat system. It has a parliamentary system. The Gram Sabhas are held 4 times a year. Now they have many more than that. And those Gram Sabhas are very, very active places. Tamil Nadu, the panchayat system is largely, the panchayats largely are reporting organizations. They go to the next level, which is called the Union Panchayat, and give suggestions about what can happen there. They have some budget, but it's not as big as some other states. Yet they're very active Gram Sabhas. You can imagine Tamilians being very active speakers. Yeah? Andhra Pradesh, because of the wisdom of Chandrababu Naidu, who was then the chief minister, destroyed its panchayat system. It didn't even hold panchayat elections till they were hauled to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court made them hold panchayat elections. And that legacy continues to this day, both in Telangana and what is now Andhra Pradesh. The weakest panchayat system in the country. One village, one panchayat. They barely have any Gram Sabha meetings. The panchayats have no power, and they don't do much. So they sort of have a naam ke vaste election. Somebody is elected. Okay? So you have three different levels: high-level panchayats, medium-level panchayats, and low-level panchayats. The question that this book is trying to ask is, we have this principle called Gram Sabhas. What actually happens inside them? What are the actual kinds of dialogue that take place? Point one. Point two, everybody says that this discussion and dialogue is affected by poor literacy, it requires high levels of literacy. All these Europeans say that. So does that actually matter? Point three, it's all affected by language and culture. Yeah, Maharashtrians debate a certain way, Telugus will debate a certain way, Malayalis will debate a certain way, Tamils will debate a certain way, Kannadigas will debate a certain way. Policy can't make any difference to this. So I wanted to test if policy makes a difference. And how did I do that? I recorded 300 Gram Sabhas, transcribed them, and I had a natural experiment, which I'll show you in a second. We overlaid the old boundaries of Bombay Presidency, Hyderabad, princely state of Hyderabad, Madras Presidency, Mysore, and so on, that, remember, in 1956 were reorganized along linguistic lines, and we matched villages that are on either side of the modern state border, but prior to 1956 were part of a bigger political entity. So they had the same administrative structure with 300 years. And they spoke the same language. So I found Marathi speakers in Karnataka, or shall we say Kannada speakers in Maharashtra, whatever the case may be, Tamil speakers in Kerala, or Kannada speakers in Kerala, as the case may be, Telugu speakers in Tamil Nadu, or Tamil speakers in Andhra Pradesh, as the case may be, and I matched those villages. So any difference we observe between those villages can only be attributed to state policy after 1956, not to language. Okay? And you see this magical thing. It's all about state policy. It's got nothing to do with culture. The Gram Sabhas that did the best were those in states like Kerala, states like Tamil Nadu, states like Karnataka, which had an active panchayat system. And Andhra Pradesh was by far the worst. And Kerala was by far the best. So it actually translated that way. So in other words, it's not about culture. It's about state policy, right? So other research we have done showed that literacy had little effect. Because what happened, literacy is village literacy. If literacy levels were low in the village, there were leaders who took up the slack and sort of helped the village along. Yeah? Research I did back in 2005 showed that when Gram Sabhas were conducted, corruption was reduced. Yeah? Gram Sabhas didn't represent the preferences of elites. It was not like some elite person was dominating the whole conversation. You read my book, Oral Democracy, which is free download online from Cambridge University Press. You'll see that there are all kinds of dialogues taking place with all kinds of underprivileged minorities and privileged people, all arguing with each other on an equal basis. These are active spaces of dialogue, right? Okay, now I'm going to shift to another topic. I've talked about the importance of deliberation. I have 20 minutes to speak, so forgive me. I've taken 20 years of research and summarized it in 20 minutes, so forgive me about that. Second thing, democratizing data. Why can't citizens design and analyze their own data rather than us, seriously overqualified people, doing it for them? This is what we try to do in Tamil Nadu, in the district of Theni, with 40,000 households, okay, using women's self-help groups. And the idea really here was to have these groups come together and develop a questionnaire for themselves that emphasized the topics that were of interest to them, okay? And they finally, after 3 days of discussion, they came up with a questionnaire that was 30 minutes long. I want to show you that questionnaire. Firstly, there's only a 17% overlap between the NSS question, the National Sample Survey questionnaire, and the questionnaire that these ladies developed. Yeah? Covered a range of themes, but look at the questions. Instead of question, which is standard in the NSS, for instance, how many vegetables did you buy in the last week? The question these ladies developed themselves, no intervention from me, by the way. Did the person who eats last in the family get enough to eat last week? You know exactly as an Indian what that means. Such a brilliant question. One question that tells you that that household is suffering from hunger. Then questions like, the standard questions, what was the age at marriage? Here, no. Was there a decision taken into account when you had a marriage? Did you marry a relative? This is a part of high sort of inter-relative marriage. So they didn't want that. Then empowerment. Who makes decisions on assets and loans in your family? That's the standard question. No, here. Do you decide on what clothes to wear based on your own preferences? Has there been any instance of violence in your family? They were asking all. Then those days, it was 2000, we did in 2014, there was low digital participation. So we asked women if they could text on the phone and things of this kind, right? They asked, not me. And this was, implemented on a tablet. The women's self-help groups did it themselves. And they did a census, 2 rounds, each took 2 weeks. Census of the entire district, right? And we then visualize the data from them. And this was the important part. How do we get that data back? We simply have to take that data and present it in a way that people can understand. Now, this is the overall image. I'll come to that if you're interested. But I want to show you some of the interesting visualizations that the MIT Media Lab that was working with me and the women co-produced. The women's self-help group members co-produced, looking at who has greater decision on certain issues in the family. Is your opinion accepted related to your child's education and marriage? They basically said if the wife's head is bigger, let's use the data to visualize that the wife's head is bigger, she has more say. The husband's head is bigger, he has more say. And the in-law's head is bigger, they have more say. You can see clearly on each of those dimensions who makes decisions regarding your clothing, who makes decisions regarding the number of children, who makes decisions regarding when you visit your parents' house. These 2 villages I'm giving you examples of have very, very big contrast. Left village is much more empowered for women. This is a visualization that you don't need an advanced degree to understand. Okay? Another example, assets. They asked, do you have a house? Do you have your own house? Do you have a fridge? Do you have a TV set? And, do you have chickens and so on? And if you acquired that asset in the last year, you got a green box around you. If you lost the asset in the last year, you got a red box around you. If nothing happened, there was a blank. Now look at village left and village right. Which village is better off over the last year? Clearly the one on the right, more green boxes. This is serious data work, folks. This is not some made-up stuff. This is serious data work. Yeah? Decisions on marriage and family. Some of you who've done state and so on know that stem and leaf diagram. We took a version of that. Yeah? This is questions on whether they married relatives and so on. If each one is a flower, the height of the flower is age at marriage. Number of leaves is number of children. If it's a red flower, that means you married your relative. Yellow flower, you didn't marry a relative. If the flower is not a bud but is fully open, that means your decision was taken into account in who you decided to marry. It was completely closed. That means you had no say in that decision. And we then visualized it in the 2 villages. Which village does better? Okay? So this is exactly what do you do with all this data? We did a process. Oh, sorry, this is also interesting. Food. Banana leaf. Eating in a banana leaf, which is very common in the south, as you know. The brinjal is the amount of vegetables you've had. Papaya is a fruit. Rice and chicken. Okay? Blank means you answered yes to the question. The last person who eats in the household went hungry. And we then contrast left and right village. And you see the right village is doing better than the left village on this. There is, in fact, hunger in the left village, which is very good on the other dimensions, if you remember. Yeah? So what you do with all of this is you have a process of feedback in the Gram Sabha. All of this evidence, all these visualizations were presented in the Gram Sabha. All the SHG groups and the Panchayat had a budget they would spend that they had to allocate was about 2 or 3 lakhs. That was spent on the basis of observing these data. And research we did showed that, in fact, it was spent better and better decisions were made. In fact, hunger was reduced, open defecation was reduced because of this. Simple idea, and I'm not saying that this has to be implemented all over India. It's the principle. Data does not have to be the province of some fancy researcher. Data can be the province of citizen and be a tool of empowerment. Okay? Second example. Third example I'm going to go into is incentivizing politicians in Tamil Nadu. All of this, by the way, is based on published research. This is a simple experiment. It sort of says the following thing. If we give a politician, Tamil Nadu has elected presidents, village presidents. This is about their village president. If the village president is an A-grade president, they will get a monetary incentive for public money, not for their salaries, but more public money for the village. Or, in the second arm of the experiment, they will get a certificate saying you're an A-grade president. Okay, similarly for a B-grade president, similarly for a C-grade president gets nothing. Now, what we did was basically we sent this 200 villages the same letter saying that, we are implementing all of this. But in the experimental village, control villages, nothing, just a letter was sent that will be assessed over this period. In the experimental villages, they call the financial incentive letter or the certificate letter, what we're calling the kudos letter. Yeah, otherwise the letters are identical. Now, what is key to this is that underlying the entire system was an SHG-based system of independent monitoring of the performance of these villages that was supervised by PwC, okay? Where budgets were audited, where a committee was formed from a very faraway district consisting of SHG members, former village presidents, local bureaucrats that assessed each panchayat on their performance. And that was then translated into A, B, or C grades. So that independent system of monitoring is very, very important. Yeah? And I told you the monetary was, I think in 2014, grade A received 6 lakhs for the village, grade B received 3 lakhs. And of course, you had the information treatment, which was basically a certificate of this kind. We hope Jayalalitha in those days would sign it. She ultimately, unfortunately, couldn't because she didn't survive in power. But the chief secretary did sign it. And they could use this as a poster. They got several flex posters, small posters. They could use as campaign posters. Yeah? And what were the results? Reduce corruption, basically. Better access to private transfers, better access to public goods. And those hamlets, there are 3 villages approximately in each panchayat in Tamil Nadu. The non-headquarters hamlet got more access to public goods. There was a decrease in corruption and nepotism, reduced clientelism. The president was going away from his own village to take over other villages. Most importantly, there was no difference between the financial incentive, which is quite expensive, and the non-financial incentive, which is basically just the cost of printing a few certificates. It's a very cheap intervention based on an accurate and widely legitimate system of assessment of panchayat quality. This really had a huge impact on the quality of local government. Okay? Why can't we do this? All right, cheap thing, right? So let's go to the next one. I want to now come to the last experiment I just finished during COVID, which is in my home state of Karnataka, where the idea really is, are administratively run villages better in terms of governance than those run by elected representatives? We all hate on our elected representatives. We say that they are very inefficient, and therefore we have municipal commissioners running our cities. Let's say in panchayats what happens. Yeah? And the reason we're able to do this, it's very difficult to find these experiments. Usually when you look at the effect of democracy on things, people do VDEM experiments or cross-country regressions. Those of you economists know what I'm saying, which are not really causally defined. So we had a nice natural experiment because in COVID, what happened was all elections were halted. They were just going to have elections in 2020, they were halted. So no panchayat, there's 6,000 panchayats in Karnataka, all didn't have elections. But 200 of those panchayats were in a different electoral cycle for something that happened in 2005. And so therefore they had elected representatives in charge because their elections were going to happen later, all right? Now, just to show you where these things were located, why this is a good natural experiment, this is one block called Davangere block, which is in Davangere district in Karnataka. Those yellow panchayats are distributed within the block. So within the same block, you had both elected and mainly appointed panchayats. And then all across Karnataka, if you see, this was quite evenly distributed across the state, right? So it was not sort of some very specialized thing. It was pretty randomly assigned, okay? And we do a lot of balance tests. So those of you who know econometrics, it sort of passes all the criteria, yeah? And I'm just going to show you 2 graphs. This is a very, very detailed paper. Each line in this graph represents a district in Karnataka, comparing the effect of elected to non-elected. And the metric we're using is the match between citizen preferences, what citizens want the government to do, and the budget the government spends on that particular issue. That budget data comes from millions of records from the Panchayat Department's own admin data. Okay? And the preferences come from a survey we did of 11,000 households. Right? We're able to run these regressions. The top thing you see is the elected, bottom thing is the appointed. The elected is way to the right of the appointed. In elected Gram Panchayats, the match between citizen preferences and the money the Panchayat actually spends is much closer, about 20% closer as it turns out. There are many results like this. I'm going to show you another important one, which is basically NREGA demand, the demand for labor days from NREGS. This is a graph in NREGS demand. All of you know, which is a story all over India, that during lockdown, a lot of people went from urban areas back to their rural homes because there was NREGS to support them. It's a remarkable thing with the NREGS program that it supported people not just in rural areas, but in urban areas as well. So you see that around July 2020, there's a huge peak. just before the lockdown, a huge peak in NREGS demand. The blue line represents elected panchayats. The red line represents appointed panchayats. You see that till the lockdown is hit, they're more or less even. But suddenly during the lockdown, the elected panchayats start doing about 12% better. In other words, the responsiveness to the NREGS need was much better in elected panchayats than in appointed panchayats. Yeah? Now, there are many other results we found. We found, for instance, that bureaucrats, local bureaucrats were more likely to attend office in elected panchayats. We found Gram Sabhas were more likely to be held. Many, many metrics to show that the indicators of governance, real indicators, not some made-up stuff, using the own admin data of the panchayat, showed that elected representatives do better. So, simple question. Let me conclude by raising a few points. What I'm calling this reflexive paradigm, by the way, I can do these things in Indonesia, I can do these things in many countries. India is our country, so I'm doing it here. Why don't we have ward sabhas in our cities? Why are our wards so big? Bangalore, my city, 1 million, 500,000 per ward. What connection do we have to that municipal councillor? Why don't we reduce the size of each ward? And why don't we have ward sabhas, where we can have a direct interaction with our representative and interactions amongst ourselves, and give those ward sabhas, like the Gram Sabhas have, some administrative power over budgets, over planning. Point 2. Why don't we increase resources to Gram Panchayats through revolution? No bureaucrat likes Gram Panchayats because they take power away from them. Why don't we increase? In fact, we should give them more power. We need, importantly, credible systems of performance. Shamika made this point too, that we need these systems to track how we are doing, which are not done enough. Very easy to develop these systems. There's a lot of admin data we can already use that are quite reliable, not made up data. And we can use them to track performance. Why don't we do it more? Why don't we improve the link between self-help groups and panchayats? Many states are trying to do that, including Maharashtra. We should do it more. Incentivize elected representatives. Give them rewards. Give them certificates if they do well. Yeah? And not just by picking the politically most conducive one. There are lots of these. In Karnataka, we have the Swarna Grama Yojana, which is the gold panchayat. It's completely selected by some politician. Yeah? It's not based on any performance criteria. Democratize data. Learn. And there are many, many examples. In Nepal, what we're trying to do is we're trying to, it's a very complicated thing. We're improving the quality of local government by giving citizens a map of all the resources in their community, the budgets associated with that, and give them the ability to give reports on each public good, on each common property resource in their community. Then they can go to these village meetings and say, you have so much money, you've done nothing for us. You've spent so much money and nothing has happened. There's an important dialogue because there's data to track it that citizens can understand. And for God's sakes, yes, India is urbanizing. Don't start blaming Gram Panchayats for being bad agents of governance. That's what city people like to do. They are much better governed than your cities. So, in fact, instead of looking at that stupid 74th Amendment, please read it. Don't take my word for it. Read the 73rd Amendment, read the 74th Amendment to the Indian Constitution, both passed in 1992. You can see for yourselves how bad urban governance is because there's no political will to make it good. There's no constitutional amendment equivalent to the 73rd. You have something called the 74th Amendment that's completely toothless. Okay? So all of these ideas can come to urban areas to improve urban governance. We have shown you in the panchayat system how well it works, at least in some states. A lot of my work is in Tamil Nadu and Karnataka and a little bit in Bihar. But there's work in Maharashtra that's beginning along these lines, and it's clear that nobody's saying anything is perfect. It's a relative statement. Okay? I'll stop with that. Thank you.
You can see why it was so important for me to get out of the way as quickly as possible. And if anything, I would have preferred to stay over here and listen to a longer talk from Dr. Rao. But there are a whole host of questions that I myself want to ask, but I'm sure there are lots of questions that all of you want to ask as well. I'm going to try and intersperse some questions that I myself have been wanting to ask Dr. Rao for a very long time. But let's begin with the audience. If there are any questions, please raise your hands. We'll try and make sure that the mic reaches you as quickly as possible. The gentleman right at the back in the green shirt, I think.
So wonderful talk. So my question is, I have read this oral democracy. It's amazing how it works in the Gram Panchayat. But deliberations can largely work if the deliberations are on equal terms, But many times in the villages, there is a power hierarchy, there is an elite capture. And some voices are actually suppressed. I think M.R. Sharan in his book, Last Among the Equals, he kind of shows that, So it's usually the Gram Panchayat head. If it is an upper caste person, he captures the power. So how do you equalize these deliberations?
Please.
Okay. So, in the South Indian states, which my book is about, in other papers, what we've done is that we did a survey of the same villages. We did a household survey in the same villages that we recorded this information about what people's preferences were that the Gram Panchayat should do. Yeah, and we had a lot of demographic information on about 40 households per village. Then I matched what the preferences were of those randomly selected households and what was actually discussed in the Gram Panchayat. Okay, and if there was a match, we did a regression on that to sort of see whose preferences win. Is it in fact the elite? Is it the ST or SC, or is it a richer person, more educated person? What we found, interestingly, that it was the median person whose preferences were represented, not the extremes. And if you go back to the median voter theorem in political economy, that is the mark of an efficient democracy. You want a democracy to represent the median voter. And that's what we found. Yes, Sharan, who's a dear friend of mine, and we write many things together, finds different things in Bihar, but he's not doing research on Gram Panchayats. He's watching Gram Panchayats as they go along, and there will be certain panchayats where that happens. But if you do research on, and he's currently doing research on Gram Panchayats in Bihar, and I'm interested to see what he finds. There is a certain gap between Maharashtra and the southern states, as Shamika showed, and those on the East Coast. Yeah, so hopefully that gap will continue. But what I have worked in Bihar now since 2007 actually, and you see that an enormous amount of catching up is going on. Yeah, so the trajectory is very promising, though currently the differences might exist.
On a related note, because a question was asked about MR Sharan, and particularly for the students in the audience, the importance of taking field notes while you're doing research. The book that MR Sharan wrote is a direct outcome of he having taken excellent field notes. But at least I am under the impression that this is an art that has been dwindling over time. Could you speak a little bit about it?
This was the engagement we had this morning. I don't know how many of you were there this morning. Can you raise your hands? Only 2 people, so I'll repeat that stuff then. Look, I mean, my body of work is largely about mixing methods. And Gokhale Institute, 1942, V.M. Dandekar goes off and starts studying those villages in Satara with a team of sociologists and so on. There's a long history of India, of mixing these methods, and happened in Karnataka, happened, the Scarlett Epstein, and then, there's a long history. What's happened is that as we economists have started thinking we're smarter than everybody else, we've forgotten to talk to people. We develop surveys, we collect the data, and we think, we can manipulate the data and we understand things better. Reflexivism applies to research as well. We have to learn to listen to we shouldn't be treating the people we are studying as subjects. They are equal to us. We are not better than them. And they should be participants in the research that we're conducting. And we are performing, Gandhiji had this idea of trusteeship. I see research as the same thing. We're trustees. We do our work in their service. When we're doing it in their service, that means they should be as much a part of that dialogue as we can manage. Yeah? Treating them as subjects, as something lesser than us that we can manipulate, is the heart of the problem. That culture has to come back, and interestingly, in my view, it is coming back slowly. Yeah, I don't know about Gokhale because I'm not familiar with your work, but the kind of interest I'm getting from young people after that talk, everywhere I go, I was in Chennai last week, I've talked in Bangalore about this 2 weeks ago, everywhere I go, I have young people coming to me, how can we do this more? So I think that is changing. Yeah, and Sharan is certainly a great example of that.
Absolutely.
Hello, sir. My name is Arya. I had a question regarding incentivizing politicians to perform better. At some level above a Gram Sabha, let's say even a state level, for example, the amount of money that politicians earn from corruption surely trumps the lack of a financial incentive or in an assessment system that you proposed. So how will you incentivize politicians like that to...
So corruption is a cultural thing. And what do I mean by culture? It's just like, why do we have dirt? Pune was not such a dirty city. Bangalore was not such a dirty city. There was a time when these things were done better. Why? Because look at Indore, look at Surat. Why is it happening there? Because there is, where's Jayati? Talk to Jayati if you want to know about Indore. She gave me a very nice assessment of what is going on in Indore. Once you have a collective spirit that comes from watching everybody else behave a certain way, then you will sanction those who don't, right? If they don't behave that way, you will kick them out or you will not like them. Now, imagine a situation where you have these incentivized performance indicators and A-grade certificates. I'm not saying the financial. Just give a certificate. Don't give anything financial. Yeah? A, B, C. If all the corrupt fellows are getting C, all the citizens will know. Only the good ones are going to get an A. Yeah? And all of us have a certain tolerance of a certain level of corruption. You know, they need to earn some money. It's okay. Yeah? It's when the excess thing happens, that happens in many metropolitan cities in India, that you start saying, what the heck is going on? Why is my money going? I'm not going to pay taxes with this. That shift will take place if you have this. Guaranteed, because it's the same thing. It creates a culture, it creates a cultural change by rewarding those who are not, who are performing well. Yeah?
So, as a follow-up question, across both your own sets of experience as well as people whose work you've read about, what is common to those places where culture has been most effectively changed? What were the factors that led to that change in culture?
Look, I think there's a lot of dialogue in India now, and I mean, I've been talking about this for a very long time, so happy to talk about it again. The word decolonization is overused. I don't like it. Yeah, but it's loosely bandied about. But we have to find ways of doing things that are intrinsic to how we do things. Yeah, my organization, other organizations tell you what to do based of best practice. That word best practice is the worst bloody word on the universe. Yeah, somebody's best practice is somebody else's worst practice. You should have practice based on your own experience. And India has a wealth of experience. We can learn from, I mean, we took from SEBA, we made it to this NRLM. We took the Karnataka experience from Gram Panchayat, made the 73rd Amendment. And just for two examples I've talked about, there's so many like that. There are many great NGOs doing great work in India. Let's learn how to scale that up. Yeah? And let's, I mean, as I keep saying, this idea of deliberation, of oral democracy is very intrinsic to who we are. Go back to the Buddhist Sanghas. I mean, you know, Ashoka talks about Sanghas. I don't know. It's a beautiful book by Patrick Olivelle. If you have not read it, please do, on Ashoka. He talks about this thing concept called Sanghas, which were extremely strong mini-states that Ashoka was actually worried about. These are getting too powerful. These Sanghas had no king. They were ruled, turns out, by collective consensus. Now, that collective consensus involved the consensus of elites, true. And at that time, I'm sure we don't have any evidence either way, but I'm pretty sure that, you know, Dalits were not involved in that conversation. That can be fixed. And we've learned how to fix it through reservation for Panchayat presidents. But let's learn from these traditions of ours. Yeah? I mean, you see it happening anytime there's a big empire, you have decentralization. Yeah? We are a hugely complex country. To think, I mean, as Shamika was saying, that you know, when each district is 2 million people, for God's sakes, can't we decentralize there? What is the logic in this? And I would lay the blame, unfortunately, on there is a culture of governance in this country that comes from Missouri. Yeah, that's centralized, that wants to centralize and keep power. Yeah, that has to change, and only citizens like you can change it. I can't do much. Boss, if you don't have motivation, I mean, I'm trying to create motivation, right? So there are about 150 people here. There's a motivation to start with. Yeah, it requires a collective will. Yeah.
Good evening, sir. It was an amazing talk. Thank you for that. I have a question. If you have any comments on the Election Commission of India declaring the assets of the people who stand for elections. Say, for instance, they declare, now culturally, we own assets, unlike the western part, say, mobile phones or vehicles, we declare gold, we declare, say, something else. So do you think there should be a change in methodology of how we are evaluating the people who are representing us? That is a question.
Definitely we can make that system better. Yeah, and we can think of different ways in that can happen. But despite all those declarations, you look at the list of people with criminal records getting elected to office. So citizens don't seem to care at the end, the point the gentleman was making. I think by simply having a performance, forget all of that. I mean, I'll give you an interesting example. I was doing fieldwork in Karnataka. I'm actually doing a book on panchayats in Karnataka. I was doing fieldwork in Karnataka. And we looked at, I was literally going personally to about 20 gram panchayats in northern Karnataka, which is in the dry belt. Yeah. It's Bidar and Raichur and places like that. And every panchayat was doing badly except one. It was doing beautifully. Yeah, beautifully. Went and interviewed the guy. he had cauliflower ears. You know, if you've seen comics with cauliflower ears, it's when your ears have been bashed in so much, they look like this. Yeah? And his reputation, alleged, I don't know if it's true or not, is that he was a Supari killer who had run for office. So I was very careful talking to him, but he ran the best panchayat in the whole bloody place that I saw. So, you know, forget those criminal records, assess them on their performance, yeah? I mean, not forget it, certainly report them, maybe report them better, assess them on their performance, and then see what happens. The ones who are in the business to make money will slowly be eliminated. It's the ones who want to do some good that will stay. Yeah? That's what I'm trying to advocate.
I'm not sure I'm being tongue-in-cheek when I ask this question, but is it possible to have negative incentives for politicians? Clearly, the positive ones work, as you mentioned in your presentation. Are there examples of negative incentives for
There
politicians?
certainly are negative incentives. They're very difficult to implement because they require a constitutional amendment. It's very difficult to do.
Sir, you spoke about decentralization as one of the solutions, but it also has a different connotations because there's a resource availability and kind of I feel that interdependence would increase. So how would we address that in case of decentralization?
I mean, look, the panchayats I know best are in Karnataka. Some of them have own revenue generation of 40 to 50 crores. There's no shortage of money. With growth, revenues will come, largely based on property taxes, yeah, and on user fees. Those do increase. The average panchayat's budget in Karnataka 1 to 1.5 crores. Yeah, those revenues will increase as growth happens. Yeah, so and if you bring it to the cities, you have plenty of budget. Just spend that budget better. Yeah, that's what decentralized. If citizens participate, are allowed to participate, those budgets will be spent better, whatever they may be. And as they increase, they'll be spent even better. Yeah, you have to take back government into your hands. And I don't know why there should be any political party that objects to that. Because it is a deeply, deeply Indian idea.
So I said at the start that it's a little bit like introducing VVS Lakshman to cricket fans, but in a sense my analogy was wrong because this was an even better innings to watch. I'm sure all of you will agree. Dr. Rao, thank you so much.